Freeman. I'm here to talk to you about writing and share the things I love, whether it's history or family stories, writing for Chicken Soup for the Soul, or in some way try to encourage other people to write and especially to study history. It consists of course, any good writer, you know that you have to do various things to make money at it. You're not going to be able to quit your day job until you're able to have several books out and have other sources of income. So that's probably one of the best things to share with you. One of the first things I published happened to be a children's play, and I wrote it because the teachers in Lillian Elementary School at the time in Alvarado, they needed a program for their PTA. They needed to study Texas history, and they only had a few months left to accomplish those things. It was the first year of the test. So I took the Texas history book home that day and studied, went through it and wrote a little play to go with it, and it turned out so well that I submitted it to Hendricks Long at the time. It was one of the major publishing companies in Texas. I submitted it, they liked it, bought it, and I got a contract that said I was an author, and I told my family I sold, I'm an author, and they said, good, what's for dinner? So that's kind of the way life goes as a writer. You start off and you think you've accomplished that one thing that you love the most. Of course, I did not grow up wanting to be a writer. I was not a reader. I could not read in 3rd grade. As a matter of fact, it was so bad, my teacher said, if you don't read, you're not going to be happy in 4th grade, so we don't think you should go to 4th grade until you can read. Well, the letters were stupid. They jumbled up. I had no idea what the word would start with. The teacher would say, I'd ask how to spell something, and they'd say, well, go look it up in the dictionary, and I'd say, I don't even know what it starts with. How do I look it up in the dictionary? So now I know that that's called dyslexia. At the time, I thought I was just stupid because we didn't have a title for it or a label for it. Therefore, I grew up not wanting to read because Tip and Mitten was such a stupid book, and I could think of better stories in my head. So that's kind of how I started on that path, and then by the time I got to high school, I'd never gotten anything but a C highest in English because I couldn't spell. And I didn't care where the commas went because I knew I was going to make a good grade anyway. Anyway, long story short, I had a teacher who changed my life. She gave me my first A for what I had to say and how I said it. And underneath it was a D or an F for how I spelled it. Anyway, that's where I was in school. And then in my 30s, I started writing just out of wanting to accomplish something. About the same time, my imagination started clicking in, and so I started writing about a Christmas tree, and it became part of the Coldestan, Texas. And I sold this book to TCU Press, and it really cemented me into wanting to write fiction, especially for middle grade students. There's just something about that age group that is an awakening that I enjoy. I also enjoy writing short pieces. So over the years, I started writing. TCU Press didn't do any more of the middle grade readers. So I started doing other things. I started writing for Chicken Soup. I love stories. I love to tell family stories. So I would think of things that my family had done or that I had done with my kids or events, where there was just other things to tell good stories about. And I realized that Chicken Soup for the Soul has a little list on their webpage. So if you go to chickensoup.com and go down to the bottom, it'll say submit a story, and then it says stories they're looking for. And so I started writing different things. This particular one, this might have been about a gentleman that I interviewed who was 102. I've I've written that story several times, and how interviewing him over the years as he turned 100 and 101 and 102, because at that time I was an editor for a magazine, I started getting to know him, and I wanted to show how just watching him changed my life. So that's how he said just keep putting one foot in front of the other. A lot of those stories started forming when I was writing an editorial for my hometown paper. So many hometown papers, small presses need stories. They need columns. You just have to figure out what it is they want and then change it to your style of writing. So I wrote for 3 years for my friend who had become the editor of the hometown paper in Tulia, Texas. For 3 years I wrote a weekly column for her, and it was called Dip Street and Other Miracles. Now for those of you who are not born in a time when gas was 35 cents a gallon and you could not drive up and down all the time on the Dip Street, I'll tell you that it's the most fun experience you'll ever have. Riding around with your friends, meeting in the middle of the street, talking, honking, hundreds of cars on the street, and you know all of them. It's just more fun than I could tell you. So I kind of took that analogy and I mixed stories with it to say that life is like riding down Dip Street. If you come up to a dip or a bump, you just take it carefully so you don't bottom your car out. You go to the side a little bit. And if you got a friend beside you and you can laugh and talk, life is so much easier to get through the dips. If people realize when you're reading that book and you finish it in 2 or 3 days, and that author spent 2 or 3 years of their life writing that book, and then someone else spent a year, 6 months or a year editing that book, and then somebody else did the design of the cover, somebody else put the money up for that book. It's amazing that our creativity can sustain that kind of effort and energy and financial cost. But we do, we love it, we love the stories. That's why we write the stories. It's not necessarily how you put words down. It's the stories we have to tell, and they're important, they're wonderful.
Well, I am Sue Land, and I am the director of Billy the Kid Museum, and have been since, God only remembers when, I don't, 2007 I think. Well, Brushy Bill was a character that lived here in Hyco and Hamilton County for 17 and a half years. And in 1949, 1950, he decided to tell the true story about his life, and he claimed to be Billy the Kid. The man that he was telling the story to asked him to first prove it to him, and then he'd see what he could do about making it known that he was alive. And that his one request was that he be given the pardon that had been promised many years ago out in New Mexico. A young man in Pennsylvania decided he wanted to know the truth of things, and he was very experienced in researching and authenticating antiquities and things, so he thought he'd find out truth or lie. So he set out, and the first thing he proves is Pat Garrett did not kill Billy the Kid in July of 1881. Factual proof was there. Of course, disregarding the fact that everybody out there at that time didn't believe it was Billy the Kid had been shot anyway. It really wasn't. It was a young man that was riding with him. He was shot and killed by Garrett, shot him in the back without seeing who he was shooting, and he buried him as Billy the Kid. Well, people kept saying, we're going to, do DNA. We'll take the, DNA from the young man buried in New Mexico. Well, that body washed away in 1908 when the whole cemetery was washed out. So they didn't have anybody to take DNA from. So everybody says, take DNA from Billy the Kid, Brushy Bill. Well, you can take DNA all day long from Brushy Bill, but you don't have a living descendant of Billy the Kid, so it won't do any good. But the facts of everything that Brushy told, every story he told, the things he did, was proven not to have a lie amongst them. The young man doing research said he could not find a lie. So I believe it now. I'm Sue Land, and I'm an author, and I'm privileged to be a published author.
Good. So how long does it take you to write a book, and where do you get your ideas?
Well, For the most people, it probably wouldn't take them very long. If you sat down and write every day for just 15 minutes a day, you're going to put a book together pretty good. Then you're going to read it, you're going to edit it, you're going to rewrite. You know, with getting one done within 6 months to a year is great. I have a problem. I never like my work. So I do rewrites a whole lot. And then I get brave enough to send it off. And so it takes me about a year. Sometimes, depending on how in love with the story I am, it'll take a little longer.
Where do you get your ideas from?
My head. I love cowboys. I love murder mysteries. I love fun things. And that's where I just lay in bed at night sometimes and start thinking. My husband, he never read fiction, but he always wanted me to read it to him. So I love doing that. So you have to have a time you set aside for writing, a time and a spot that's yours. Used to, when I had children growing up, I would go into my room and I'd say, okay, this is my work room. I'm going in here, I'm going to shut the door. Nobody's to bother me unless the house is on fire or you've broken a leg. And that's what you have to do. You have to isolate yourself. And that's when I did my writing. In those days, I was only writing for newspapers and magazines and things. So when I started writing a book, that was totally different. That is hard. You have to train yourself to sit down and do it every day. If it's not but just for 15 minutes, sit down and write. Well, I guess the best advice I've received is to sit down and write. If you have a story you want to tell, you've got a family story, whatever you got, sit down and write it. Don't be discouraged. Just as memories come to you, write them. As ideas come to you, write them. And then you can go back and put them together and make the story you want out of it. But you've got to make yourself just sit down and write. And then after a while, it becomes a habit.
I pick up a broken